Hi there, and welcome to the Dan Ostrander Presidential Historian's Journey, face-to-face, Nixon through Biden. I'm John Cassidy, and I'm very, very honored to have Dan Ostrander with me today. And with the presidential race right around the corner, we thought it would be great to really get a sense of presidential history, especially recent presidential history, because Dan has had the good fortune to spend a significant amount of time with 9 of the last 10 presidents. He's written two books with two former presidents. His third book is about to be published, and we're going to talk about all that. Dan, welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. It's an honor.
Well, it's kind of an interesting time we live in, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we've got an incredible election coming up, maybe a turning point election in a lot of people's minds.
Well, let me add something there.
Uh-oh.
People need to really enjoy this election, no matter what side you're on, because this is the most interesting election in American history. I mean, when you take a look at everything that happened, the only thing that's comparable to this is the election of 1876. And and what you find, I mean, you got a presidential candidate being knocked out by his own party.
So time out. So you touched on something. So folks, let me just give you a little background what this is going to be about. We're going to talk a lot about Dan spent significant time with a bunch of the last presidents, not Mr. Hayes in 1876. You weren't around then, right? No. So Hayes beat Tilden, and to your point, there's been complex and very much challenged presidential elections throughout our history. In fact, going back to 1824, Jackson and Adams. So what we're seeing, while it's not necessarily new, it's probably bigger and louder than it's ever been because you have 24/7 social media, multimedia, all these platforms, all these quote-unquote pundits out there. And there's just a lot of, as I term it when I talk to people, there's a lot of noise.
Right.
And obviously Donald Trump brings a lot of attention because of his bravado, and we'll touch on that a little later. Mm-hmm. And as the person most likely to win the next election, according to the polls as of this week. So it's an interesting time, and people are talking more about presidential politics, I think, than ever before. And Dan's experiences with a variety of presidents going back to Nixon, and the different things that were headlines throughout the lives of many people watching this, and many young people who never heard a lot of what you're going to hear today from Dan. And we're going to open this today, Dan, because you got a chance and talk about this. You were a graduate of Chico State. You got your master's there.
Right.
And you taught at Butte College and you taught at Chico State. Cal State University Chico. It was Chico State when we were growing up, hanging around and enjoying Chico. And those are stories for another show. But talk about that opportunity because you were a graduate. The president, Steve Perez, welcomed you back and invited you back to talk about your history with presidents. And it was a phenomenal workshop that you did for students and interested people at Laxton Auditorium in May of this year.
Right. No, it was. I was really honored because I like history as a hobby for me. I taught 38 years at Butte and 2 years at Chico and stuff and it was just a hobby. I just really enjoyed it, and I got paid for it. So it was great, and I've met 9 different presidents. I could bring this stuff into the classroom and share it with students. And so anyway, Chico State asked me to, President Perez asked me to put on a presentation. So I was honored, and he and I sat on the stage, and then he asked questions, and I didn't get to answer everything I had. I had about 25 type pages of stuff, but he had 14 questions, and we got through a good portion of it, but we ran out of time. But I got all kinds of positive feedback, and people really enjoyed it, so it was really gratifying.
Well, here you are, the guest lecturer. Mm-hmm. You got 1,000 people in the audience. You got the president of the college who's interviewing you. Mm-hmm. And I think at first he wasn't quite sure how this was going to go. Just watching it, and folks, you're going to get a chance to watch that entire presentation here in just a minute. And the look on his face and his ears and his hands and his body language, listening to stories you were sharing about experiences you had with all these presidents going back to Nixon, Carter, Ford, the Bushes, Clintons, Obamas.
Yeah.
Just incredible information that you could tell was so excited to learn and hear about. And he had never heard any of these stories, and how you connect the dots through those periods. This is going back, 10 presidents. It's going back a long way.
Yeah.
If you look at Biden as the sitting president today,
Right.
I mean, you're covering some amazing things that have gone on in this country's history. Obviously Watergate was a big deal. You talk about about your experience dealing with Richard Nixon and that subject, the financial crisis with George W., all the things that you weave through time, and you try to he learned, I think, the president of the college and other people in that audience learned that things today aren't that much different than yesterday, are they?
No, they're not. No. And actually, if you want to go back to the Alien and Sedition Acts during John Adams's time, you find that people were mudslinging back then, and it was just as bad as it is today.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Interesting. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna let the audience take a look at the video.
Okay.
Which is you folks sit back, relax, get a cup of coffee, a nice glass of wine, whatever you want to do, and learn. You're gonna hear some stuff that's just incredible. You're gonna learn about Mr. Ostrander, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna add to what Dan was able to share with all the folks at California State University Chico in May. So enjoy this, and we'll be right back.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing today? That's actually a really, really good response. Thank you. My name is Steve Perez. I have the privilege of serving as the president here at Chico State. It's so nice to see you all out there. I got to meet a handful of you throughout the day, and this afternoon I walked over and saw the bench that is there for your fraternity and talked to a number of you, and really, really glad to see you, talk to you, hear about what Chico State was like and what it feels like to be back home. So welcome, and thank you for being here. But I'm not here to talk. I'm here to ask questions, and I'm here to ask questions of Dan. And so Dan, let me read your bio a little bit, but I've been waiting to talk to you for quite a long time. You've had some experiences that I think are phenomenal, and can't wait to hear about some of the background of those. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. How many people have met him before? All right, well, let me tell you something. Maybe you don't know. Right? It's my pleasure to introduce Dan Ostrander. He's a proud alumnus who has a bachelor's degree in history, a master's degree in social science, and a teaching credential in history, all here from Chico State, which is pretty special, so thank you.
It was special.
Yeah. After graduating, he became a history professor and taught at Butte College. I'm going to look at how many people are under 20 years old. How about under 30? Under 35? All right, keep your hand. No. So Dan taught at Butte College for more than 35 years. In 1987, he was invited to lecture at Hofstra University's annual presidential conference, where his presentations caught the attention of Presidents Nixon and Carter. This paved the way for his entry into the worlds of 9 U.S. presidents. Think about that. You get to meet 9 U.S. presidents and talk to them one-on-one. 9 U.S. presidents, some of whom he developed lasting relationships and co-authored books. Dan brought some of his memorabilia here today, which you can see in the lobby after our talk. And I think some of it was out there and you all were checking it out on your way in as well. But some of his best treasures are in the stories he tells. They're all up here. We're going to dive into some of those now. So Dan, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity from you, President Perez, and also from university and Lambda Pi, and my former roommate, Mike Strand, who helped put all this stuff together and everything. So I feel very honored.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about what brought you to Chico State in the first place, but let's skip to the end of your time at Chico State and what happened to you after first, because I want to make sure we have enough time to go through some really, really interesting stuff. How did a Chico State graduate end up developing these relationships with presidents within about a decade of graduating?
Well, there are 2 keys to my entry into the presidential studies. The first was Hofstra University, which helped me out tremendously. And then the second was my lectures. I was able to pawn my lectures off on 3 or 4 presidents, and they liked them. And it started a relationship with them that just continued. And so I felt very fortunate.
So you graduate from Chico State. You're out there teaching. You were at Butte College?
Yes.
And you get invited to go to Hofstra
Yeah.
to do. How did that happen?
Well, I was always kind of a big Nixon fan, and they were doing a conference on his presidency. And so I wanted to do a paper on Ford's pardoning of Nixon.
Okay.
And I loved Nixon, so I went back. I took up the invitation. I went back there. And Nixon wasn't there, but all the Watergate people were there.
Huh.
So I interviewed all the people in Nixon's administration with the Watergate, and I used that as a basis to write a paper. But some of the interesting things that I learned, I mean, like breakfast started out where I was having breakfast with John Ehrlichman, and he was a special assistant to the president. And then Chuck Colson, who was the legal counsel. And I got all this stuff on tape. And so I asked Colson straight up, I said, how could you guys violate the Constitution and violate these federal laws in good consciousness?
It's a pretty direct question.
Yeah, and what he said was, it blew me away. He said, our loyalty isn't to the Constitution, it's not to the law, it's to the man. In other words, Nixon. And so in talking about all this with him, I developed the core of a lecture that I ended up giving at Butte College, and a copy of it is out there, and I gave it to Nixon. I'm showing a picture of Nixon and I discussing my lecture. When I teach, I try to draw historical parallels between contemporary things and past. Microphone, sorry. So anyway, what ended up happening was I developed this concept called realistic idealism and political idealism. Political morality and personal morality. And politicians, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, doesn't make any difference. You all play like your personal morality, you're doing everything right. The other guys are the jerks, they're tearing the country apart and all this. But you're out there behind the scenes, disturbing everything, cutting things up, trying to do whatever it takes to get your person elected. And that's the political morality. And so that's what Colson was talking about. So he was talking about you got to do what it takes to win. Now, Nixon was very interesting, and a lot of people didn't understand him, and I felt very fortunate to get to know him, and I got to know him as a result of this paper that I wrote that's out there, the lecture that I gave. And that is that Nixon was a realistic idealist, and that is he wanted to accomplish the higher goal in life and for society. But he realized that you can't always follow the rules, and sometimes you got to break the rules in order to accomplish the higher goal. And so that's what Colson was talking about. But Nixon firmly believed that pragmatism or breaking the rules for your own benefit is immoral. And that's what happened in Watergate. And he didn't know anything about it until he found out about it, and then he tried to cover it up, and that's where he got into trouble. And so, consequently, he had to resign from the presidency. And then there's political idealism, and that's Jimmy Carter. And I've known President Carter for over 35 years, and I love the guy, even though I'm a Republican. He's a Democrat, doesn't make any difference. But and my wife and I even we had a house in Plains up until just last month. We sold it. We spent about a week a year with him. And so anyway, but Carter did everything based upon morality. And so sometimes he was ineffective because you got to do it the morally right way. And if there's a roadblock there, you don't bend the rules.
That's interesting.
And so Carter was a man of great character. I didn't always agree with him, and we had some arguments and all this kind of stuff. And I had an ally in Roseland because she always stuck up for me. but anyway,
But I mean, it does get to something I deeply believe, right? You can have differences of opinions with people, but as long as you believe the other person truly believes what they're saying and has the right ideas about what's important, it's okay that we disagree as long as we disagree respectfully and have good conversations together.
right, no, and that's true, and I agree 100% with that. But Carter, none of the other presidents liked Carter, and the reason why, it was his way or the highway.
Okay.
And so, anyway, so.
So let me touch on something that you said in what you were talking about when people were saying who they're loyal to, not loyal to the Constitution or not loyal to
the laws.
To the laws. It reminded me of something that has stuck with me. I read in a book. I think it was by James Comey. And he's talking about the first time he was in the Oval Office, and he's sitting there with the president and a lot of other people, and talking about a pretty weighty, pretty important conversation, as would be the nature of those conversations.
Right.
And he had this realization of, it's just us. Right? We're the people that are going to be here deciding this. That it's just people in the room making that decision. And so, one of the things I was super curious about is, you got pretty close access with all these presidents and got to see what their lives were like and got to see what they were like as people. What's it like to have that kind of close access to presidents?
Well, President Carter once told me that everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time.
Yep.
So, but at the same time, it's pretty intimidating because you don't want to say anything stupid. And so you're trying to think. I remember one time when I was dealing with Clinton on something, and he was coming out, and I knew right where he was, Nixon conference, and he'd just spoken, and I wanted to talk to him, so I knew right where he was going to come out. And so I was waiting there, and so then trying to think of something smart to say, and halfway intelligent. And I wanted him to sign something for me, and I completely got carried away and didn't ask him to sign it. And so then he walked away, and he was around the corner, and I yelled out, "Mr. President." And he stuck his head back around the corner and came back over and said, "Yes?" I said, "I forgot to ask you to sign this." "Oh, okay." So he did, but I just remember how stupid I felt because I was so busy concentrating not to make a fool out of myself, that was it. But Don and I have been fortunate enough to be invited to the houses of 5 different presidents. And so after a while, you develop a comfort zone. And so, as Carter said, they put their pants on one leg at a time. And they're human beings. Don and I went to George W.'s 70th birthday party and at his house in Crawford. And so one of the things that I found amazing is, we had the room of the house and everything. He's got his cat litter box right across from his office. I'm in his office, and there was no sign of anything that this guy was president of the United States or he'd done all of these things. He literally put his pants on one leg at a time.
Yeah.
And he's just a down-to-earth guy. He likes to joke around and so forth, and he doesn't take himself too seriously. So I was just impressed by his office and, everything.
Yeah, that's special. And it sounds like you had a pretty close relationship with the Carters.
I do.
How did that come about? Right? How did that relationship, you and Don and Rosalind and President Carter?
Okay, it's Rosalind, not Rosalind. She hated Rosalind.
Okay.
Right, so that's just a pet peeve because she hated it so much. I always got to do. But anyway.
Thank you.
So Carter had a program. He started it back in, the 90s. He had what was called the Winter Weekend. And so it was a ski weekend. It was about 70 people. And then I got invited to go back and go snow skiing with him. We did that for over 20 years. And at the Winter Weekend, they had they were auctioning things off. And so I put together historical documents for Carter to auction off for money for the Carter Center. And it was fun to do it and everything like that.
That's right.
But Carter didn't know how to do it. And so this friend of mine and I, who were both into this kind of stuff, Carter wanted to put a high price on everything. I said, no, you don't do it that way. You put a low price, because then when people buy it at a high price, the difference is a tax deduction. So then they are willing to pay more because they get a tax deduction. And so this is going to blow you away, but the highest price item that I ever put together for Carter is sitting out there. And I got to know Nixon pretty well, and I used to take things, I'd either mail them to him and he'd sign it, or if it was something special, I would get it signed in person. So I had this picture of Nixon and Elvis, and I wanted to get it signed. And by the way, that picture of Nixon and Elvis, according to the National Archives, is the most requested document from the National Archives, more than the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. That's what I read. And so anyway, I asked Nixon's staff, and this is a lesson as well. I never, my wife, Dawn, can verify this. I don't take no for an answer a lot of times. And so you got to be politely aggressive in life to make things happen sometimes. And so they told me, I said, why do I mail this off to the president, or will I ask him in person? Well, he won't sign that. And so then the last event before Nixon died was a luncheon celebrating his 25th anniversary of his presidency, getting out. And so during the luncheon, I went over and sat next to him at the luncheon, and I pulled out the Elvis photograph, and I said, Mr. President, will you sign this? And he said, yeah, I'd be happy to. Not only did he sign it, he told me what a character Elvis was and how he snuck a gun into the White House.
No.
Yeah. And his excuse was he was going to give it to the president. And then I got a copy of the letter, because Elvis wrote a handwritten letter on American Airlines stationery to Nixon. And he said that he wanted to serve as an undercover agent, that he knew all the druggies and all this kind of stuff, and the communist propaganda, he knew all that stuff. And so he wanted to be where he could do the most help. And so I got that letter. And so anyway, it's all handwritten on American Airlines stationery. Well, so then I had that picture. And then I had an Elvis 45 record signed by Elvis. Yeah, signed by Elvis. Had the 45. And so I put them together for a Carter auction. And I was hoping to get $50,000 for it in the auction. Guess how much it sold for?
More?
More. $400,000.
Oh, my goodness.
$400,000. That's the highest... That's the highest item that I'd ever donated to the Carters, but it was, I mean, I was just, it was unbelievable, that it went for that much,
That's incredible.
Yeah, so anyway, it was fun, and.
So that's a unbelievable piece of memorabilia. You got a lot out there.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, I've heard some other things you've got signed from Nixon. What's the most amazing piece of memorabilia do you think that you have, to you at least?
Well, you asked me that question, and I got four. It's like asking a mother which is her favorite child.
All right. Well, and when I get asked the same question, I say they're all my favorite. Let me tell you about all of them. So go ahead.
So I listed four. The number one is that Nixon photo out there with a copy of my lecture, because it started a whole relationship between Nixon and I. I got invited to Pat Nixon's funeral. There was only 225 people there. And I said, what am I doing with here, And his staff told me he likes what you wrote. I got invited to his funeral. I got invited to all these conferences. I learned so much from him that I used it in my history class for 20 years. And so he was a very complex person, and he wasn't, I've met, as I said, 9 different presidents, and the majority of them are not what the public image is. Nixon was kind of shy, like I was. I got invited by the Republican National Committee after Nixon was out of the White House, and he liked to hold court in New York. So there's like 75 people there. I got invited to that. And so, anyway, Nixon stood up and gave a lecture for an hour, no notes, and talked about foreign policy and all this kind of stuff. And then I'm sitting, I'm sitting in a row, in the front row. Nixon's chair was right where you are. And so after he got done talking, he came back down and sat in the chair. And everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation. There's no media there or anything. And my hands are getting tired from clapping. And I look at the MC and I go, and he goes. And so I lean over and I say, Mr. President, you got to get back up there and, say a few words or something, And it was like he was standing there like this, and he goes to take a look, really stiff, and he looks behind him to see what was going on. And he saw all those people standing and clapping, and so he felt he had to go back up. And he was a New York Giants fan. He talked about the Super Bowl and football, and he sat back down. But it was so amazing because this guy was president of the United States, vice president, traveled all over the world, and he didn't know how to handle that applause.
Sure.
And so forth, and he was really big on loyalty, and I think that's the reason that I hit it off with him, because I basically put it in a historical context. I gotta do this. This was the key to Nixon. Okay, one of the things with the lecture. I have to put this down for a second. And with Colson, this is the way society is supposed to operate. Okay, Colson told me with Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy, and what they were doing with standard operating procedure, things were getting further and further out of whack in society, sort of like they are today, And so Watergate brought it back down to here. And Nixon had to resign. He violated the law, and I pointed that out in my lecture. There was a peaceful transition of power, just like the founding fathers had anticipated and wanted. And so I pointed all this out in the lecture, and Nixon had no problem with it whatsoever. And he actually agreed, that he'd screwed up, and so forth, So
let's talk a little bit more about President Nixon and him needing to resign. Mm-hmm. You've studied Watergate extensively.
Yes.
And what do you want to share about Watergate, that time in U.S. history, and what might we might not know about President Nixon that maybe we should know? Okay.
Well, Nixon. Well, one of the people that I tape recorded was Jeb Magruder. He's the one that authorized the Watergate break-in.
Okay.
And he was a Presbyterian minister. And so I interviewed him back at Hofstra, and I said, did Nixon know anything about Watergate, about the break-in? And he said, no. He said, I authorized the Watergate break-in from the Florida White House, and there's no taping system there. And Nixon wasn't around. So then I wrote my paper on Ford, his pardoning of Nixon. And a copy of that paper is out there, and that started me a relationship with Ford, and we did the book, and I got Ford to come to Chico State because of that paper, and come out to Butte College because of that paper. Mm-hmm. So then I called up Magruder again from at home and said, okay, I'm getting ready to send this paper off to Ford. I want to make sure, and to Hofstra, to make sure that that I'm correct. Nixon knew nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And he said, sure. He said, Nixon didn't know anything about it. So then after Nixon died, after Haldeman died, and a lot of the key Watergate players, the Nixon Library, somehow I found out that Jeb Magruder put out a story that Nixon authorized the Watergate break-in. And that really ticked me off because that could change history and the interpretation. So I called up the Nixon library and says, I got him twice on tape saying Nixon didn't know anything about it. So I sent the tapes down to them, and they played them for him, and that was the end of the deal, you know. But yeah, Nixon was a proud person. He felt he always had to work harder than everybody else, and he felt sometimes he just never got a fair shake, you know. But he was an honest person, and he really was big on loyalty. Pat Nixon wanted him to fire Haldeman because Haldeman was a dirty tricks guy. And he wouldn't do it because Haldeman was so loyal to him. So
that's interesting. And you describe Nixon very loyal, very smart, hardworking,
Right.
And Jimmy Carter very morality driven. And at least in listening to you, they seem like different personalities, very different people, certainly different politics. But I understand they had a relationship between each other that we might not know about.
right. You'll see a picture of Elvis Presley. Actually, you'll see two pictures out there with Elvis Presley. One with the Carters, and Jimmy Carter and Elvis Presley are cousins.
So can you say that one more time, please?
Jimmy.
I'm not sure I heard that right.
Yeah. Jimmy Carter and Elvis Presley are cousins. They're distant cousins. And so, and Elvis is related to two presidents. And for a long time, you know, this is a senior moment on my part. But when I talked to Nixon about Elvis, I thought he told me he was a cousin, but he's not.
So he's not Richard Nixon's cousin. He is Jimmy Carter's cousin.
He's just Jimmy Carter's cousin, but Elvis is related to Abraham Lincoln.
You're kidding me.
No. I mean, before I gave this presentation, I wanted to double check because I discussed this with Carter. I got Carter to sign the picture with him and Nixon together, and I said, well, you know, I told him I had the Elvis, you know, because we sold that. This is the second one, but anyway, that I have. But anyway, I told him, I says, well, you and Nixon are cousins. You know, you're related somehow. You know, and he didn't deny it. You know, he didn't know. I don't think, but he didn't deny it. But then when I started trying to verify, because I didn't want to come out here and say that to everybody, and when I checked it out, it said, no, he's related to Abraham Lincoln, but it didn't give any lineage how that happened. So,
But did President Carter and President Nixon did they talk to each other? They have a relationship together?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
no. Yeah,
Okay.
not that I'm aware of, yeah.
Let's change gears a little bit. That's 2 of the 9 presidents.
Okay.
And you talked about President Carter being very down to earth,
Right.
A normal person, as we all are. What about the other presidents? Did they all see themselves as how did they see themselves?
Well, Ford, I really like President Ford. I brought him out here here in Butte College and everything like that. And I did the paper with him, and he really liked the paper. But here's the thing I really appreciate about Ford. Ford's got character. He had the vision to see that he had to pardon Nixon to get Nixon out, because he held his first press conference, and everybody, what are you going to do about Nixon? What are you going to do about Nixon? They didn't care, you know, about the U.S. boat in Korea, you know, that was having problems with the Koreans. They just wanted to know about Nixon. So he realized that he had to get Nixon off the table. He also realized that this is going to cost him politically big time, and he had the courage to do it. But here's one of the other things that demonstrate Ford's character. And Haldeman even told me this when I was interviewing him. I interviewed him several times, called him at home, and then also back at Hofstra. And that is that Nixon did not feel that Ford was presidential timber. And that Ford knew Nixon felt that way. And Nixon even said to, I'm trying to remember who it was, but anyway, he said, can you imagine Gerald Ford sitting behind that desk? And Ford knew that, and yet he had the character to pardon Nixon, and he had the compassion because he said Nixon had suffered enough, and the country needed to move on. And I got a story I can tell about how painful this was for Ford because, he told me he wasn't planning on running. He was just going to finish off Nixon's term, but then he and Betty got really comfortable in the White House and liked it. Yeah. And so
it's hard to move over
yeah,
and over
it's
again.
hard to move out, yeah.
I'll try to jog your brain by talking about a different president. Because you wrote a book with President Bush. And I remember when he made his pledge, read my lips, no new taxes. I'm not going to try to do an impersonation. But read my lips, no new taxes. And then he had to raise taxes.
Right.
And that's a hard thing, I would imagine, for a person who runs for president and then becomes president, makes a promise to a country, and then decides, I'm going to have to do something else.
Right. And that, again, as Nixon said, there are three things that make a great leader: head, heart, and guts. So you got to have the head to have the vision to see what the problem is. You got to have compassion for people when you're dealing with it, and you got to have the guts to carry it out when you know what's right, even though it could cost you personally.
Right.
And this is the thing that happened with Ford, with Nixon, is that he knew it was going to cost him, and he still pardoned him.
Right. And that's some parallels with President Bush and raising taxes.
Right, because Ford didn't want to write. I had to talk Ford into doing this paper. In the book that I wrote, Ford participated in that book as well. Read My Lips, No New Taxes. There's a section on that.
Yeah.
Ford reviewed that. So anyway, how the book with Bush came about, and this is a lesson for everybody, that I was in my office, and it was a rainy day, and I called up Bush's office in Houston. I ended up getting his chief of staff, and I said, "Is Bush going to write his memoirs?" And she said, "No, he doesn't like to write." And I said, "That's too bad," because in one of my lectures, I draw these parallels. So I drew a parallel in my class between Thomas Jefferson and George Bush. And the parallel is that nowhere in the Constitution could Jefferson justify buying land, and he bought the Louisiana Purchase. And he was a strict interpretation of the Constitution. He violated every one of his principles because it was the right thing for the country. Okay, so that's political pragmatism. You do what you have to do when it's the right thing for the country, and you put the country first, you put yourself second. Okay, so when it came to Read My Lips, and I felt that Bush didn't gain anything personally. He lost politically. And why did he do it? He did it because it was the right thing for the country. And on an April 23rd meeting in the Oval Office, Sununu told him, when he told Sununu he's going to go back, he said, "There's been a lot of great one-term presidents." And Bush said, "I got to do the right thing for good governance." And so he knew it was going to cost him. And yet he did it anyway. And he didn't want, and so anyway, so Rose told me to write a letter to the president. She didn't know me from Adams, but she liked my story on the phone. So I gave her the parallel in the lecture. And then she said, "Would you put that in the letter to the president, and I'll see that he gets it." So I told him he needed an historian to help him do all this stuff. And it's important that not for him, but that people, the general public, understands the significance of political pragmatism. Just because a person changes their mind on a particular issue, you got to ask why. Did he gain personally? Did he gain politically? Or did this benefit the country? And so, anyway, so Bush wrote me a letter and said thanks, but no thanks, because I was crazy to do it. So I don't give up. So then I was at a Nixon conference back in Washington, D.C., and Brent Scowcroft, who was in the Ford administration and was a good friend of George W.'s, really liked the Ford book that I did. And he told me it was a great piece of work. And so I told him I was trying to do something with Bush, and he says, you write him again, and you copy me. So I did. And next thing I know, I'm getting a call from President Bush, well, you know, I'll do a book with you, but I don't want to do that topic. And I said, well, no, this is important that you do this topic, not for you, but for the country, that people understand this principle so they can evaluate and have the tools to evaluate future presidents when they get involved in these type of situations. So he said, okay, write me a one-page letter of why I should do this. So I did. Then he called me back and said, okay, I'll never forget it. Rose called back and said, the president wants to talk to you. I go, now? And she says, yes, now. You know? And so, but anyway, we did we put the book together. My wife, Dawn, and I worked on it together, and she helped. And then after we got the thing structured and everything, we went back to Houston and took the book back there and discussed it with him and had him go over it. And he looked at it and he said, you know, he said, my mom told me not to be braggadocious. And so I can't say these things about myself. Well, see, I had all of his speeches in there. In the back of the book, all of his speeches are there, and it documents, his own words document my theories about him. So anyway, he says, we're going to switch this. Because before he asked me to be his ghostwriter. So
Okay.
I was going to be the ghostwriter of the book, and then and I was going to write the foreword. Then he says, we're going to switch. I'm going to write the foreword, and it's going to be your book.
And that way he's not bragging.
He's not bragging.
Yeah. So you write a letter, or you try to get him to write a book with you, and he says no.
Yeah.
And then so you copy somebody else, and then he says, all right, now write me a one-page summary about the book and convince me of this.
Right.
How many times did you proofread and rewrite that one-pager?
I don't know. I mean, it was pretty simple in a way, because the key concept is a self-evident truth. And that is that I'm not trying to snow them or anything else. It's people need to understand this principle. You see, and that why you did that. Ford was the same thing. You know, Ford didn't want to do it. The current book that I just finished sending off to the publisher is about George W. Bush and the 2007-8 financial crisis. And people didn't understand what great leadership that Bush and Obama provided during that financial crisis. And so, and the government made money. They made, besides getting the $444 billion back from that they spent on TARP, plus paying the interest on that $444 billion, plus the administrative cost, the federal government made $403 billion profit off the financial crisis. Plus they spent $31.2 billion in grants to people who were in the process of losing their homes. See, and people didn't understand that. And so there's certain things that the public needs to have an understanding of, and that was my pitch to Bush.
So I mean, you had President Jefferson, President Ford, President Bush, all doing things that they didn't necessarily want to do, but and as you're saying, they did it because they thought the country needed it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you think that's a common trait among the 9 presidents, or we're going historically back to President Jefferson? Is that a common trait among presidents?
Well, that's why I like the presidency and studied the presidency, because I feel most people in the legislature are looking to get reelected, and what's next. But the presidents, as a general rule, I'll make that as a general rule, always looking to do what's best for the country. And like Bush Sr. told me that the office of the presidency is more important than the president. And so the institution. And I don't think, in my own personal opinion, the last 3 presidents have gotten that. I mean, Trump thinks it's about him, and it's not about it's about the office of the presidency, And I felt Obama, I've met him numerous times. I even went to his 49th birthday party with 50 people. And I don't think he got that. And I don't think our current president gets that. So I think that there's something that the Bushes, the Jeffersons or the Fords, all those people had the reverence for the Oval Office. Bush Sr. wouldn't even go into the Oval Office unless he wore a tie for respect for the office. And so, and I just think that, I guess it's just the changing times in society where things have been lost,
Well, thank you. So you got another book coming out.
Yes.
It's about the 2007-8 financial crisis you were just talking about. What drew you to that subject? And did you have the same kind of response from George W. Bush about writing it together?
No, the book started out to be like father, like son, because I saw the same type of leadership. And then I realized that he doesn't want to be compared to his father. Don and I went to the Bush family roundup in Crawford, Texas, and I really got some insight into the family dynamics because the three Bushes, Jeb, 41 and 43 were on stage, and Barbara was the MC. And I felt so sorry for W after they got done ripping him. They just tore him apart, in front of everybody, and what a screw up he was when he was younger and all this. And they really wanted Jeb to be president. They didn't want him to be president. And so he is done now. He's not going to do, he and Laura are done. He just wants to retire into the happy sunset and everything like that. So, and he never took himself too seriously. He was president of the United States, and he's very comfortable in his own skin, and so forth. But he just, he doesn't want to have anything to do with anything anymore. So I couldn't get him. I was going to try to get him to write a foreword to the book, and he said that he doesn't want to do that.
Okay. So some people don't like to talk about themselves. You mind if we talk about you for a minute?
Okay.
Let's pivot just a little bit. You've raised more than $3 million in honor of the Carters for Boys and Girls Club in their hometown. And you also made a crucial donation to the Chico Boys and Girls Club here, right downtown, which I went to a couple weeks ago. It's a spectacular facility. Your name is on the main building, and you should be very proud of that.
I am,
Why the Boys and Girls Club? Why is the Boys and Girls Club so close to your heart?
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area, and it was kind of a tough community. And I was running around with some of the wrong people, and I got in trouble, and my parents moved to the other part of town, and they had a boys' club, just a boys' club then at the high school I went to. It was actually junior high and high all in one, De Anza. So I started playing basketball there. And it just helped me. I transitioned into sports and played basketball for 3 years for the high school. And what I really feel is that the Boys and Girls Club is a key to the future of our society. And the reason why is because they take care of kids who don't have parents who are taking well care of them, that they don't get sometimes they don't get 3 meals a day. The Boys and Girls Club here in Chico, they get a meal before they go home.
That's right.
And stuff like that. I had a conversation with Nancy Pelosi one time and about this. And it was really interesting because she didn't get it. And we were down, in fact, one of my fraternity brothers, I think he's here, Bob Cohen, went down there with me. And anyway, we were down in San Francisco, and it was an Obama deal, and she was there, and she was talking to this rapper, Will.i.am, and so I went up and I was talking to him. And her conversation was, well, we just got to give everybody a scholarship to go to college if they know they're going to get a scholarship. And I said, no. I said, Speaker Pelosi, you don't get it. I says, there's kids that don't have anybody at home, who don't care about them, they're not motivating them, and so forth. And in Richmond High School, less than 50% of the people at one point in time weren't graduating from high school. And a high percentage of them got thrown in jail, And so I said the Boys and Girls Club is a savior for the future generation. It's the future of our country. And so what you need to do is pump more money into organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, and then parents who are working, they can have their kids go to the Boys and Girls Club, pick them up after the club, and so it helps those parents out, those working parents. So it's such a great institution, you know.
I couldn't agree with you more. As I said, I was just out at our Boys and Girls Club here in Chico. Chico State, I'm very proud. Chico State is intimately involved in the operations. We've got our students that are volunteering out there. My understanding, when it started, it didn't have grant funding, and it was started by a bunch of Chico State faculty and staff and got it up and running. And again, your name is on one of the buildings out there, and there are dozens and dozens of kids every day that get to go into that building, and they get cared for, they get loved, they get to build relationships with each other that they wouldn't have otherwise. And so I just want to thank you for the support of the Boys and Girls Club, because I think you're changing lives after lives after lives. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Well, also, if you want to cure the homeless problem, this is the future homeless. You know, you're trying to take care of. You know, you're trying to make them self-sufficient so they don't end up like a lot of people are in society now. So that's why I feel they're the future of our society.
That's exactly right. Thank you. And so let's go back in time a little while.
Okay.
I talked about we're going to start at the end. You left Chico State, and then you went to Butte College, and you talked to lots of presidents. But before you were at Chico State, right out of high school, you went to a community college.
Right.
And then took some classes at UC Berkeley.
Yeah.
But then you decided to come to Chico State.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, in high school, I had a great time. I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, you might say. I did want to graduate from high school.
I'm not sure I believe that, but okay.
I didn't want to graduate from high school because I had so much fun. But I went to Contra Costa College, and then I didn't want to take history classes from a community college because I felt it would be a reflection in my resume that I took these, you know, so I took history classes, one class a quarter at Berkeley.
Okay.
While I was going to, well, then Berkeley was so big and so impersonal, and I was the type of person who needed, you know, personal extra attention, or, you know, just, I didn't want to get lost in the shuttle. So I came up here to Chico because some friends were up here to visit, and I liked it. And then I got Lois Christensen, who was in the history department, and Old Hutch. They were two of the instructors I had, and they were on my master's committee, and they were really great. And then I pledged the fraternity Lambda Pi, which is one of the best things I did. Mm-hmm. And they teach leadership and loyalty and all that. But then in 1978, I went on sabbatical leave, and I traveled around the country. And I went to, one of the places I went to was Harvard. And so I was at Harvard, and I'm looking at the students, and they're all, excuse my French, assholes and elbows taking notes. And I thought, wow, what an academic environment. I wished I'd have gone to college here, you know. But then I thought about it, and I thought, I wouldn't trade my education and the experiences I had at Chico State for any college.
Can you say that one more time and look right at the camera?
No, I wouldn't, seriously, because of the fact that I got a great academic education, you know, and Lois Christensen worked with me. And as I said, I had to work extra hard. I was sort of like Nixon. I had to work hard, mm-hmm. harder than other people to get where I'm at. But it paid off, you know, and she was great for me. And Old Hutch, I'd been over at his house numerous times as well. So there was personal contact in Berkeley. You get an associate professor or something like that, you know. And then the fraternity that I joined, and Pioneer Week, you know. No, but seriously, you get so much out of a Greek organization. You got to, you know, there's a meeting every Monday night. You got to be able to voice your opinion, stand up in front of a group and talk about your views or values and all this kind of stuff. There's brotherhood, there's loyalty, and you work together, you know, as a group. And then Pioneer Week was such an educational experience as well. I was head of Pioneer Week one year for our fraternity and so forth, and it was just, and I interviewed with businesses, I interviewed for education, and I interviewed for the government. And I remember, you know, a couple of businesses telling me that they wanted to have somebody who was either in the student body or who was in a Greek organization, because they developed these, particularly a Greek organization, because they developed these social skills, and you need those instead of having the guy used an example of some kid with a slide rule on his hip with a 4.0 grade point average versus somebody who's got a 3, you know, a 2.0 or C average, but has all these social skills. You know,
It's funny you say slide. My mom literally loved her slide rule. She loved it. She told me all the time when I had got my calculator out and then a computer. She loved her slide rule. But I can't agree with you more. I'm so proud of the experience that our students have when they're here, and the time that we get to spend with them, and our privilege of being able to work here. It is such a special place. I wouldn't trade it for the world. So I couldn't agree with you anymore.
Yeah, and Chico's such a nice community. It's a beautiful campus, you know, and so it's a smaller campus. It's bigger now than it was. I mean, you're down to 13,000 students, but when I came here, it was, you go into the cafeteria, or the CAC as they called it, and everybody knew everybody, you know.
Yeah.
And 4,000 students or whatever, and but still, it's still a small campus.
Oh yeah, no, it's a special place.
It is.
You okay? Let's have a little fun.
Am I okay with what?
Let's have a little fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's do a little word association.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to give you a president's name,
Okay.
and maybe you give us a word or a sentence or two about their leadership style.
Okay. Oops.
Uh-oh.
There went my cheat sheet.
How about Gerald Ford?
Okay, Gerald Ford. I kind of already covered him a little bit with the pardoning.
Yeah.
You know, he had the heart, he had the character, and he had the compassion to deal with that pardon.
All right.
And he had the character. You know, George Sr. Emphasized character. You know, to him, character was a key factor of leadership. But I think Nixon having the heart and the guts and the vision,
Okay.
you know, to see where the problems are.
All right. What about Ronald Reagan?
Okay, Ronald Reagan is really interesting. Reagan thinks differently than most people. Reagan doesn't care about names, dates, facts, figures. He thinks in terms of concepts. So he sees a picture, like his chief of staff one time told me that Reagan would come into and I'll give you an example of this too. Reagan would come into a cabinet meeting late, and everybody's been arguing and hassling over all this stuff, and he'd get down to the bottom line right away. He'd see the big picture. Okay, I went to a presidential conference back in Massachusetts at David Gergen, who was in the Ford administration, the Clinton administration. He was, you know, news and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, after there was a conference on the presidency, he and I had a few drinks together, and he told me some Reagan stories and some Clinton stories. And one of the Reagan stories he told me was very revealing and right to the point here. And that is that the G20, which is the top 20 economies in the world, all their leaders were going to meet in the United States. So the world media was going to be focusing on Reagan and what he was doing at the G20. And so he told Reagan that Gergen told Reagan, okay, here's your binder. You got to brief this and go through this and be prepared to deal with issues. So anyway, the next morning, Reagan comes out to breakfast. He's kind of, half asleep type thing. And Gergen's first thoughts were, Nancy's going to kill us. Because Nancy controlled everything with Ronald Reagan in his personal life. I mean, I even saw her one time deny him he couldn't eat a dessert. She went like this, and I guess I can't eat that. He didn't eat it.
All right, good for him.
But anyway, yeah. But anyway, so And then what comes out of Reagan's mouth next is, well, boys, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read the briefing. Because Nancy and I stayed up late last night watching a Western.
There we go.
And so, he says, well, God, he's going to get killed, But what happened was Reagan went out there, he taught concepts, had the press eating out of his hand, and was a huge success. He didn't need to know all the little names, dates, facts, and figures in the binder. He thought in terms of big concepts. And that's the way that he saw things. And so a lot of people get caught up, like President Carter took a speed reading class when he became president from Evelyn Woods.
I remember those.
So he could read every single law that came before his desk. And the problem with Carter sometimes is he couldn't see the trees, he couldn't see the bark from the trees because he was so focused on all this other stuff. He could tell you how many nuclear weapons we had, how many this, how many that. And Reagan, hey, I got my Secretary of Defense for that, And so just two different ways of thinking.
Sure.
And so, anyway, go ahead.
All right, give me one sentence about Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton, very sharp individual. I really like him. Nixon and Clinton were very close. And Clinton used to call Nixon 1 or 2 times a month to pick his brain about politics. And so anyway, and Clinton has compassion. He loves to talk to people. At a dinner that I was at one time at the Bush Library, oh yeah, get this. Clinton defeated Bush Sr. for presidency. Well, you know what Clinton's nickname is from the Bushes?
Mm-mm.
A brother from another mother. Clinton and the Bushes are like that. Nixon and Clinton were like that. And in fact, Clinton was with Nixon when he died. And I called up the Nixon library the day that Nixon was dying, and I wanted to find out how he was doing because I was concerned. And this was really eerie because the lady on the phone says, this is unbelievable. He says, just as I picked up the phone, your name popped up on the computer because we're putting together a list of all the people for the president's funeral because he's dying, and Bill Clinton's back there with him right now. He's the last person to talk to him. And so, and then Nixon gave the eulogy. But, so anyway, Clinton. Yeah, Clinton gave the eulogy. Who did I say? Nixon?
You said Nixon,
oh,
which
no.
would have been quite the trick,
his
right?
Own eulogy. Yeah.
So we were going to wrap up here. We were talking backstage, and we were talking about all the people you've met and a lot of your experiences, which are unbelievable. But you shared something with me back there that you had talked to a lot of leaders, and you asked them the question: what would you go if you went back in time and changed something in your life? What would you change, or what would you not change? And you said they all gave you the same answer. I'm asking you that because we got a lot of people in the audience. Some of them still sort of getting started, and it might be good for them to hear that.
Okay, yeah, this had a big impact on me. They all had the same answer. They said they would spend more time with their family. And so growing up with my kids, that was a priority, is I wanted to either take them to school or pick them up, and so forth, work on the homework, because you all have kids or grandkids or know people that have kids, and they just grow up so fast that it's unbelievable, and you can't ever buy that time back, and so that was what we were talking about back there.
Yeah, thank you. And as I said at the beginning, I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. Getting the opportunity to talk to somebody who is as accomplished, has done so many great things as you, but also can talk about what it's like to meet other influential people was a treat for me, and I knew it's lived up to everything I hoped for. I hope it's lived up to it for all of you. Please join me in thanking Dan for being here, and congratulate you on a job well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. John Cassidy with Dan Ostrander live in the studio here, and we are on Dan Ostrander, Presidential Historian's Journey, face-to-face, Nixon through Biden, and you got some great insights into what Dan has been able to experience throughout his life, and I have bugged Dan for as long as I've known him to make sure that he keeps telling these stories because he has a very unique perspective, having spent significant time, as you learned in that video, of his presentation at Cal State University Chico with President Steve Perez and the 1,000 people in the audience at Laxon Auditorium in May. And there's some stuff that Dan didn't get a chance to, based on time allowed, to share that I think in the context of today's election and all the excitement around it will provide some very interesting data for you to kind of chew on. And before we get to that subject, I want to mention Dan's new book, George W. Bush and the 2007-8 Financial Crisis, is going to be released. Hopefully, Kurt's getting that in the next few weeks. You can get it on Amazon, and it will be an incredible read. And if you experienced anything during the financial crisis and you want to learn everything about it and some even more about American economic development, the history of economics in America, you want to read this book. Dan's put a lot of time and effort into it. By the way, Dan, congratulations, your third book.
Yeah, thank you.
And you've got another president captured on the cover. So, yeah, George Bush and Gerald Ford. In fact, I want to mention that Dan wrote the definitive book on the War Powers Act with Gerald Ford a number of years ago. I think it was 2005.
Something like that.
Something like that. It's an incredible book. And he also wrote the book, You Read My Lips, No New Taxes, with George Bush, when he said no new taxes. And
it cost him the election.
And it cost him the election. Dan talked him into doing the book, as you saw in the video. So, Dan, coming back and kind of building on that wonderful exchange you had with President Steve Perez at Cal State University Chico, you have so many stories, it's hard to cover them all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go chronologically. So your good friend, Richard Nixon,
right,
and the relationship you built with him was incredible, given where he was in his life and the things he went through. And he really, really appreciated what you did and how you explained his presidency and obviously some serious aspects there.
Well, it's actually a credit to Nixon because of the fact that I wasn't sure how he'd respond to me talking about Watergate and his role in Watergate. And he didn't instigate Watergate. And I explained to me, in my opinion, in my paper and my lecture to my students, Nixon understood the political process better than anybody else. I called it realistic idealism. That Nixon, when I explained that, at Chico State, he was a realist on how to accomplish the higher goal. So he realized that sometimes going through the process, you don't get where you need to get. So sometimes you got to bend the rules to get where you need to get for society. And it was for society, not for Nixon. In fact, Nixon even said that if you're doing it for personal gain, that's morally wrong. And that's what he did with Watergate. He admitted that he was wrong, and so he felt that he had to resign the presidency, because he got caught up in it. But he did not authorize Watergate. That was his team who felt he got cheated out of the election with Kennedy. And Nixon felt he got cheated out of the election.
So on that point, to give you a chance to catch your breath, that goes back to 1960.
Mm-hmm.
And just throughout our history, and you are the American history historian in the Western United States. I mean, you go back to 1824, there were 6 really highly contested elections in our history that were very dynamic and had a lot of conflict, right, and that were up in the air till the last minute or till long after the ballots were counted.
Right.
But that 60 election was a very dynamic election, but you didn't have, all these media platforms, social media platforms, all this 24/7 ability to get information and misinformation out.
And manipulate people. Yeah.
Yes. And so people had become super heightened emotionally about the past elections that maybe have been closer than they ever thought, and maybe somebody stole them or didn't. But this is not a new phenomena, is my point.
Right. No, it's not. And as I said, Nixon's felt very strongly that he'd been cheated out of that election.
And that was the Kennedy-Nixon election. John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, John F. Kennedy and Nixon election. His staff felt that way. And they encouraged Nixon to protest the election and so forth. And to Nixon's character, he thought what was best for the country, that if he protested the election, that it would go past January 20th and the country would be without a president and it'd be in limbo. So he felt it would create a constitutional crisis, and he didn't want to put the country through a constitutional crisis. So he had the character to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll take my lumps and move on. And his staff felt, we'll get him next time. And that was the purpose of Watergate, is to find out what kind of dirty tricks the Democrats were up to. And then also Nixon did some spending illegally with campaign contributions.
That never happens, though.
Yeah, no, that never happened. They wanted to find out if they knew about that, and they were going to use that against Nixon. And so that was the motivation for Watergate, but it wasn't authorized by Nixon. It was authorized by his staff and Jeb Magruder, who was the kingpin behind that. And so, compared that with Trump, who felt he got the election stolen, right. And Trump has made a far bigger deal out of it. And, I got mixed feelings. I think there were some irregularities in the election.
But it's nothing new.
It's nothing new.
Right.
But also the thing that bothers me is because there is so much slippage in our election system that it creates doubts in people's minds.
And that's the danger.
And that's the danger.
And this works both ways, because in 2000, Al Gore and George W., that election was contested, and the Supreme Court weighed in finally.
Right.
And by one electoral vote.
Right.
Or by, Bush gets it.
Right. But here's what I really don't understand is people constantly bring up, we got to create all these opportunities for people to vote, and you can't just have people come in. I monitored with President Carter the 2004 Indonesian presidential election. And everybody, yeah, you're right, everybody had to show up in person. They cast their vote. They had to show an ID. And then after they voted, they put their finger in purple ink to show that they had voted, so they couldn't come back and vote. And I was given an interpreter and a driver, and drove back into the back country, to all these little polling places and everything like that. And then the last one we stopped at, and they showed, they counted the votes, because the voting time ended at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So then at the last polling place I stayed, and they counted the votes, and there were 5 people running for president, and each representative had somebody there. They'd open up each ballot, and the way that you voted for the president at that time is the president's pictures were on the ballot. And so the ballot was like this, and their pictures were on it. You're supposed to unfold it and punch a hole through their face, the one you wanted.
Wow.
And if you didn't unfold it, you just punched a hole through their face, you had 2 holes in your ballot. So according to the rules, that was an invalid ballot.
Wow.
Even though the intent was there.
Sure.
And so this was, when they counted the ballots, they held up each ballot, showed it and everything like that, and marked a chalk on the wall for the candidates. And they put it in these ammo boxes for each candidate, put it in the back of a motorcycle, and drove it into the county seat. And so,
but they went back to the basics just to guarantee. The French have gone back to paper ballots.
Yeah.
Same thing.
But here's the thing. By the time I got back, I was probably an hour away from the county seat on a dirt road. And by the time I got back, in Jakarta had solved the ballot issue. They said, 2 holes in a ballot makes it invalid. But if the intent was there's only 1 hole here and the other hole was here because they didn't unfold it, it's a good ballot. And they solved that
quickly.
Within 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, And then I did the Miramar election. My wife and I, Don, did the Miramar election. And it was the same way. Everybody had to come up. They had to show an ID to vote. And before you could even go to vote, you had to go to your local district and show your proof that you were eligible to vote. And then they gave you a card. And if you didn't do that, you couldn't vote. And so one of the polling places I was observing, they wouldn't let her vote. And she came over to me and complained. I said, well, did you go and get your card? She said, no. I said, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. You know, and so that election went off smoothly. And that was a real contentious election because everybody's afraid the military wouldn't approve the election. You know,
Right.
there was going to be.
That was in Miramar.
Yeah, and Miramar, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if you manage it that well, then
Yeah.
people can't question it, and that's where we've lost the
Right. right.
the confidence here at this time in this country.
And I think even if people are in the back country, because the excuses are, well, everybody's got to register. Well, you take somebody back there and you register people to vote. You know, you take a bus back there and you say, okay, fine, but people got to be responsible for themselves.
Yeah.
And so you take a bus back there and you say, okay, come in here and we'll register you to vote.
Yep.
When it comes time to vote, we'll bring the bus back and you can cast your ballots. We'll pick up your ballots.
Yep.
But you got to vote in person and none of this other crap. You know,
Right.
but, you know, everybody.
Well, eliminating variables eliminates variables, right?
Right, it does. And so
Yeah.
that way you know that each ballot is counted, each ballot is personally chosen. And so it
Well, and you
eliminates
did
a lot of
that. You
anxiety.
did that with President Carter.
Yeah, I
and
did that twice.
Twice, and you know, President Carter, a Democrat,
Mm-hmm.
just part of the solution in those countries and part of the oversight to make sure those elections were held in a democratic fashion, and it worked.
Yeah, and you know what Carter told me? He said he'd never monitor an election in the United States because the standards are so different from state to state. You know, there's no uniformity.
Yeah,
You know, and he said that you can't do anything in this country.
crazy.
Yeah, it is
Yeah,
crazy.
It is. Okay, let's move on from that arena. We started with President Nixon, and this gentleman, President Nixon, put forth to replace him,
Right.
and Congress approved Gerald R. Ford. That's a picture of you with Gerald Ford, and the guy sitting next to him has kind of a weird look on his face. That's me.
Yeah.
That was, I think, in '91. Right.
Yeah,
We brought Gerald Ford to Butte College in Chico
Right.
State at the time.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the most memorable moment for me was when he got up at Laxon Auditorium with 2,000 students that thought, oh, we're gonna eat this old politician, even though he's a president. We're gonna eat him alive with questions, and we're gonna put him on the defensive. And by the end of that 2-hour session, this 80-year-old plus former president had all those people giving him a standing ovation and eating out of his hand because he was so articulate, he was so genuine, his character came through, his energy level was unbelievable.
Well, you know what was really interesting for me about that is when I picked Ford up at Chico Airport, the first thing he did when he jumped off the plane is and I got a picture of this. I had hired a photographer to follow me around that day.
I remember.
He
Yeah.
points his finger at me and he says it's imperative that we stay on schedule because each president gets a minute by minute. So I had to put a minute by minute for every single minute that he was going to be in Chico. And he said, we got to stay on that schedule. And so I said, yeah, Mr. President, I got my hand up, no problem. So then when I'm on the stage with him, he's up there talking and I'm sitting back and he's going overtime. And I go up and I point to my watch. I said, Mr. President, he waved me off twice. He was having a good time, you know?
It's funny because I'll never forget that because I brought this book with me, A Time to Heal, the autobiography of Gerald Ford, which he signed to John and Christine, to my wife and I. And I'll never forget sitting back there behind the stage. He's just sitting on a stool, relaxed, waiting for to go stand up after we had the dinner.
Yeah.
And he was just the nicest person. And then I'll never forget when he got going, just the political blood that he had in his body, just the emotion and the excitement, even though he was 80 plus years old. He just rose to that occasion. He owned that audience in about 3 minutes, and he kept telling you, "No, I'm good. I'll stay here. I'm good. I'm loving this."
Well, you know what? The other interesting thing is that was his anniversary.
That's right, because he wanted to get back to
so
Betty. Yeah.
So he came up on his anniversary to do this for me.
Yep.
You know, I sent Betty a dozen roses thanking her for sharing her husband on our anniversary and stuff. She sent me a thank you card, which was really nice.
So you wrote a book with Gerald Ford, the definitive work on the War Powers Act, which is a very controversial issue for a number of years in this country. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, Ford always felt that the War Powers was unconstitutional, and he when we did the book, he wanted a bunch of books to give back to members of Congress. So he took a bunch of books and distributed them to members of Congress. And every president from Ford, Obama, both Bushes and everything has a copy of that book. So, so it's all got delivered. Nixon had a copy.
Yep.
We did Nixon's personal copy.
Yep.
And so forth. And Nixon's veto message is in there because he vetoed the War Powers Resolution when it first came out. Congress overrode it. But one of the good things that came out of that book for me was Brent Scowcroft was in Ford's administration. And he was George Sr.'s best friend. And he was very close friends with Ford. And so I was at a Nixon conference, and Scowcroft was there. And I went up to him because he's in the book. And I went up and asked him to sign the book. And he says, "Oh, I got this book. President Ford gave me this book." I says, "Well, I wrote the book."
I remember that.
He said, "This is great," and he signed it, and everything like that. Told me it was a great book, and I did a hell of a job. So then, at another Nixon conference, I had told him that I was trying to do a book with George Sr. the same way, a little edition book on the Reading My Lips. So he was working on a book with George Sr. as well when I saw him at the Nixon conference a second time. And so I asked him how the book was coming. He says, "Oh, Bush hates to write. It's like pulling teeth to get everything out of him, and so forth." And so he asked me about, did I have any luck? And I said, no. I said, I wrote him a letter, and he said, thanks, but no thanks, And so he said, "Will you write him and you copy me?" And so I did. So next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call from Bush, But a side point to this, it shows people, I think this is important for people to keep in mind. How I got started with George Bush was I was in my office one day on a rainy day, and I was wondering if he was ever going to write his memoirs. So I just called his office, and I got Rose, and I said, "Is Bush going to write his memoirs?" And she says, "No, he hates to write." And when I teach, I had mentioned at the Chico's thing, I do historical parallels between different presidents to try to give people an understanding of contemporary society as well as the past.
Yep.
So I did an historical parallel between Thomas Jefferson and George Bush over political pragmatism. How a president has to see what's best for the country and override and overlook his own personal values. Jefferson was a strict interpretationist of the Constitution, and yet he bought the Louisiana Purchase, and nowhere in the Constitution does a president have the right to do that.
Right.
And so I pointed out, read my lips, no new taxes. Bush went against that. That was political pragmatism on his part because it was best for the country that he did do that. And he recognized that.
Yep.
And so she said, "Will you do me a favor?" And I go, "What?" She said, "Will you write the president and explain this to him?" Because I explained my lecture to her, you know. And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I wrote them a letter, and he said, "Thanks, but no thanks." And then after the Scowcroft thing, he made me write a one-page letter why I felt he should do the Read My Lips thing. And
George Bush did, yes.
Yeah, George Bush did. And then he came back and said, "Okay, I'll do the book with you."
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Never give up.
No, you don't. You don't give up, and it doesn't hurt to ask.
That's right.
Here I am, a community college professor.
In Northern California.
In Northern California. And I call up the president's office and say, blah, blah, blah. And it worked. You never know unless you ask.
No, things happen. So we got to move from Ford. Here's a great picture of you with Jimmy Carter. And that's on a fly fishing trip we had that you put together many years ago. God, 18, 19 years ago. Had a great time. In fact, Mr. Carter enjoyed the handmade Powell rod, bamboo, that you got for him. And fly fishing there with Ted Turner at his fly fishing lodge was pretty exciting time.
It was.
And the conversations in the evening were even more dynamic. So talk about Gerald Ford, or Jimmy Carter, because he's a very interesting person, and God bless him, he's still alive fighting for his life at 100 years old, right?
Right, 100 years old.
Unbelievable.
October 1st.
Incredible.
Yeah. Well, I've known Carter for 35 years, as I explained before, and he's just a man of great character, And you might not agree, and Carter and I didn't agree on a number of issues, but we always respected each other.
Right.
And he called me his favorite Republican, which I really love that title, and so forth. And Roseland always stuck up for me when we got in a dispute. She always took my side, which I really love that lady. She was great.
Yeah, class act.
Yeah, really class act. And but anyway.
Well, you and Jimmy have got you guys are close. That's the relationship you built. Again, you're his favorite Republican. You raised over $3 million for the Carter Foundation over the years. And
close to four.
close to four now. Yeah. I mean, just amazing what you did. And you really respect what he's done his post-presidency.
Well, plus another thing that I'm really proud of is when I was back there visiting Carter, he told me his last campaign was to raise money for the Boys and Girls Club in Plains.
Yeah. Which you've done up in Chico, and it's named after you. So phenomenal.
Yeah, the clubhouse.
Congrats on all that.
Thank you. But the thing is that Carter wrote a letter. I said, well, I need a letter authorizing me to represent you. So he gave me the letter, and I went around and we raised $2.5 million, and it refurbished the Boys and Girls Club in Plains, Georgia, which was closed.
Right.
And so now they got enough money to continue in perpetuity, because they put that money in a fund and all this kind of stuff. So,
and that's a picture in his kitchen. You're in his kitchen there,
right,
in Plains with Mr. Carter, President Carter. Yeah.
He's got a check in his hand that I gave him.
Yep. He likes those.
Yeah.
This is the most recent one before Rosalind passed.
Rosalind
passed, excuse me, and she hated being called Rosalind.
Yeah.
I was testing you there.
Okay.
And there's Jimmy, and that's kind of what Jimmy looks like right now, but 100 years, he's still fighting. Amazing.
Yeah. So it was really good.
I mean, the chance to be in Plains and to see how really, very humble people.
Yeah. I mean, he was in his pajamas there, and I've been over to his house many times, and we just sit around and talk, and he's in his pajamas and so forth. And I felt really privileged.
So what was Jimmy Carter's biggest regret as president in your eyes? Or what he maybe told you?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think about that.
Because he was a different kind of president. He came in from the outside the D.C. establishment.
Right. And so he was, and I think he doesn't regret that, because he felt he always had to do what was the right thing. And I think probably how the hostage crisis got handled.
Yeah.
But one of the things, too, which reminds me about this is, because Carter was a very painful experience for him. And he spent his last night in the White House trying to get the hostages released.
Right.
All the way up, and they wouldn't budge. So he called Ronald Reagan at 7 o'clock in the morning, the day of the inauguration, to brief him on what he's found out and give him up. Reagan wouldn't take his call.
Wow.
So Carter felt that Reagan had cut a deal with the Iranians over releasing the hostages after Carter got out of office. Because as soon as Reagan took the oath of office, the hostages were released. And he really disliked Reagan
for
that. And to me, I liked Reagan, but to me it smells. It doesn't pass the sniff test, because if you're coming in as president and the hostages have been held for 444 days, and Carter just gets off the phone with them trying to get them released, you want to find out what kind of progress he made so you could pick up the ball and run with it.
Right.
But he didn't. He wouldn't take his call. That's really an insult.
Yeah.
And especially when Carter spent the whole night trying to get this
resolved. Figure that out.
Trying to get this resolved so he could give Reagan either a clean slate or tools to deal with in the future. So, I think the way the Iran hostage situation went down, and the way maybe some of the things, the way he handled it, were probably his biggest regret.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, he was there at a tumultuous time. Gas prices were going through the roof. His economic policies, whether he was fully responsible or not, didn't seem to get the country back on.
Right.
And that's why Reagan won. So,
right. And then one of the things, too, is he gave that austerity speech.
Yeah.
To people. And that hurt him
to accept less. And
to accept less. And I think that's a regret that he had as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Let's move to Mr. Reagan. You mentioned him. There's Dan with President Reagan. Let me get that picture up there. That's a great shot, by the way.
Yeah. Oh.
That's a great shot. And you did spend some time with Mr. Reagan. Talk about President Reagan.
Okay.
The great communicator.
The great communicator, yeah. Well, one of the things that I found really interesting about Reagan is he perceived things differently than most people. Reagan, for example, didn't care how many destroyers we had. He didn't know that, or how many this or that. He could ask a Secretary of Defense or Secretary
Right.
of the Navy or whatever the case may be. He had the vision and the ability to see the direction the path should take. And so, for example, Reagan, well, let me give you an example that I'm trying to think of. David Gergen told me, a story. He told me we were at a conference together.
Yeah, Gergen was in his administration.
Yeah, Gergen was his.
Oh, yeah.
He was also head of the presidential studies at Harvard University, and he had a conference on presidential leadership that I was invited to. So he and I had drinks afterwards, and he told me the G20, and this is perfect Reagan, G20 is coming up. And they gave Reagan a book about about how he's going to handle the G20 because it's going to be held in the United States, the meeting is. So the media from all over the world is going to be focusing on Reagan. So, Mr. President, you got to get it right. You got to do your homework and all this. So they gave him a book about that thick. And so the next morning, Gergen was afraid of what Nancy would do because Nancy kind of ruled the roost. And I'll give you another story about that in a second. But anyway, he was afraid that Nancy was really going to chew his tail. So the next morning, Reagan comes out. He's all blurry-eyed and everything. And Gergen says, "Oh, my God, I'm really going to get creamed by Nancy." And Reagan comes out and says, "Sorry, boys, I didn't have time to read the brief. Nancy and I were stayed up all night watching these Western movies." And Gergen goes, "Oh, my God, we're going to get killed." Reagan walked through the press, the media on the G20, had people eating out of his hand. He taught concepts, and that's what he thought. He thought terms of concepts and everything else. Another example was I got this from his personal assistant, and I got this information while I was standing in line at Splash Mountain in Disneyland. I had just been to the Reagan Library, and she was going the next day, and we were in line for an hour. And so we started talking politics and everything like that. And she told me that Reagan would always come to the cabinet meetings late. And everybody's talking and arguing about this. And Reagan would get down to the bottom line really quick. He'd see the big picture and bingo, that's it. And so one of the discussions was the Russians are kicking our butt militarily. So Reagan comes out and says, "Well, if we can't beat them militarily, we'll beat them financially. We'll spend them to death. We'll outspend them. So, we're going to spend all this money on this program that he's going to call Star Wars."
SDI.
SDI.
Yeah.
And where he got that idea was he was in a movie about Star Wars. And he played in that movie. And so he got this idea where you're going to have these satellites up in space. You could shoot anything down from anywhere. And the Russians were scared to death of that. And they spent a lot of money. And it actually was one of the things that broke their economy and led to the
wall coming down.
The wall coming down, Gorbachev, and the dissolving of the Soviet Union. And so Reagan was responsible for that. And he had the ability to see this big concept. I'm a Nevada resident now, but I have a neighbor across the street who's very interesting. He was an LAPD guy. He left the Los Angeles police and went to Berkeley and then left the Los Angeles police. And he started a private security company out of his apartment. That private security company turned into one of the largest security companies in the world.
Wow.
And he sold it eventually for over $300 million.
Wow.
But the point is, the name of the book that he's writing, I've been helping him with it, is Turn on a Dime. And you can't believe the decisions that he made just like that. He had the vision to see what path to take. And that's what Reagan had. Some people have vision, and they can see the direction that things need to go.
Some people are point guards.
And and other people can't see where to throw the pass.
You saw that when you met Magic Johnson.
Yeah.
He was the man.
Yeah, no, he was.
Yeah.
And so the key thing for a leader is to have that vision.
Yep.
To be able to see and get a feel for the patterns that are emerging in society.
Yep.
Reagan had that feel, and he thought that way. And so he was just an amazing person,
Yeah.
And I really had an appreciation for him and his talents.
Yeah, he could work both sides of the aisles because of all the characteristics you just explained.
Right, yeah.
Okay, let's touch on the Bushes. You got George and W. This is a great picture with you and your wife and all the Bushes, and the one that's not president that many people really wanted to be president, especially in the Bush family, correct?
Yeah.
Mom and Dad.
Yeah, Mom and Dad wanted him to be president. In fact, I even, when he was campaigning for George, when George was running for president, he came up to Red Bluff. And I went up there to the campaign event. And I have a baseball that was, at the time, I think was signed by 7 presidents. It's signed by 8 now.
Yeah.
And so I took this baseball and I said, Jeb, do you see this ball? I said, it's been signed by 7 presidents, including your father and your brother. So I says, I want you to sign this ball because you got to become president someday. No. So anyway, so he signed the ball, And then when he ran for president, he was up in Incline Village and he was running for president, and I got invited to the event again. And so I brought the baseball. I said, you see this ball? It's not going to be worth as much if you don't win. He didn't obviously get the nomination, but he was a good man, And,
Yeah, no, I think so too. So talk about George Sr. and George and W, just the differences and what their presidencies really meant.
Yeah. Well, I felt sorry. Well, W is, I guess W sort of felt like he had all this pressure on him, I think, a lot to, because his parents really wanted Jeb to be president. And then he won the governorship for a second term in Texas, and he got a huge Hispanic vote. And all this money, everybody just automatically put him as a front runner. And he got all this money coming in for a presidential campaign, kind of just steamrolled everybody else. They didn't have a chance, and stuff like that. And so he's always been kind of compared to his dad. And at that picture, that was at the Bush family barbecue. And after the barbecue, we were all brought together into the barn. And Barbara Bush was a moderator. And they talked about, they're supposed to be talking about presidential leadership. But what it was they raked W over the coals. And he was president at the time. And I felt sorry.
So they were sort of trying to have fun with him, but it was really uncomfortable.
To me, it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To me, it was uncomfortable. And my book started out to be the title was going to be Like Father, Like Son, because they both had the vision and had the guts to make a tough decision and go with it for the better of the country.
Right. Despite what it would cost them personally.
Despite what it cost him personally. And he didn't like that title. He doesn't like to be compared to his father.
Interesting.
And there's a sensitivity there. And they brought up when he was in college, Good Time Charlie and all this kind of stuff. And it was really, I just remember the pain I felt for him.
Yeah.
At the time. I just thought it was really inappropriate. And maybe I'm speaking out of school, because...
Well, you have to, that's your experience.
Yeah, no,
That's
I know.
what you got to go with.
But last time I just talked to the Bush people yesterday, and I got a correction notice. The correction notice is when I was speaking at Chico State, and they saw the video.
Yeah.
I said I thought, W was done. He just cashing in his chips and so forth. Because at the last conference I was at, he didn't get up and speak to the audience. He didn't begin with like he usually did. He didn't speak at the end. During the break, I went down and talked to him, and he just looked wiped out, and he had it, So I made the assumption that he was just going to kind of
go off into the sunset.
Go off into the sunset, yeah. And so I said that at Chico State. And so I got corrected yesterday. Said, no, it's not that. He just had a bad day that day. And also what's happening is they don't want the focus on him. They want the focus on the events of the Bush Center. Because the center's going to keep going after he's gone, and he's doing these projects. They want people to support the projects, and that's going to be the focus. the Bush Senate.
It is interesting that when you look at, and we're going to touch on Mr. Clinton up next, but Clinton and Obama, they're out there campaigning somewhat for Kamala, but there's no other Republican former presidents out there. Obviously, George W.'s not out there getting behind Trump. Now, obviously, Trump didn't treat Jed all that well in
Bushes don't
their
like
battle.
Trump,
Yeah, no, they don't like Trump, so not going to get a lot of support there. But it's interesting to watch those dynamics.
Yeah, in fact, Barbara Bush even made a donation to Hillary when she was running.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Mr. Clinton.
Okay.
There's Bill. I know his wife was not elected, so we're going to cover Bill, who you spent a lot of time with.
Yeah.
And I mean, kind of Reagan 2.0 in that he could warm up anybody. I mean, he was very gregarious, correct? And still is, I guess, in many people's eyes.
He really is. He's a very brilliant man. I think I mentioned before that he called President Nixon a couple times a month, pick his brain about key issues.
Nixon and Clinton.
Even
with Hillary's history with being on the other side on the legal team that was in the Watergate fiasco. Yeah.
Right. And Clinton had a tremendous amount of respect for Nixon and vice versa. You know.
And why do you think that was?
Well, I think that first of all, Clinton's a very bright individual and Nixon's very bright. And so they both appreciated each other. And Clinton was smart enough to see that Nixon's got a lot of knowledge and insight that I can use. And that's what all presidents should do.
Correct.
They should go to
That's how it used to be.
Yeah. Go to a former president. Nixon, on the other hand, after Watergate and resigning from the presidency, felt this big hole. You know, he wanted to contribute something to society.
Well, yeah, you were at the top of the heap, and then all of a sudden...
Yeah, you're at the bottom of the pile.
Right.
And so Clinton sent Nixon over to Russia on a diplomatic mission.
Yeah.
And he really appreciated that. And then he also appreciated that Clinton respected him enough to call and ask for his opinions on things. So he felt he was contributing, and Clinton gave him that opportunity to contribute.
So Clinton was with Nixon close to his death, is that right?
He was at his deathbed when he died.
Wow.
And so I called up the Nixon library to find out how the president was doing, because I know he was pretty ill. And so this was just I told Clinton this story too and asked him a question about it, because when I called, they transferred me to this woman, and she said, "This is really weird." She says, "We're planning the president's funeral." As I picked up the phone to answer your call, your name popped up on the computer to send out an invitation to his funeral.
Wow.
And she told me President Clinton is with him right now, and he's dying. And
amazing. And who out there in the audience would ever have thought that Bill Clinton and President Nixon on his deathbed, Bill Clinton was there, one of the last people to see him?
Right. Well, Clinton gave his eulogy.
Wow. Yeah.
So this is what's really interesting. I think I might have told you this previously, but mention it here. And I was at a dinner with Clinton. It's about a 3.5 hour conversation that I had with him. And I wanted to find out what Nixon's last words were and how that experience was. So I just told Clinton what I just told you and wanted to ask him, what Nixon had to say. And he says, and I said, "You gave the eulogy and all this." He says, "I didn't give the eulogy. I wasn't there." And I got a picture of him giving the eulogy that he signed, and I was at the eulogy.
Oh, I remember you were.
Yeah. I was there.
Yeah.
So I saw it. I got a photograph of it. I got him to sign it. And I just dropped it because I didn't understand where that was coming from. And it'd been embarrassing to push him on that issue to say any of that. So
you're saying they have memory lapses too, former presidents?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or for whatever reason.
For whatever reason.
Whether by design or not. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I to this day, I don't understand what the deal was, because I thought, maybe, God, he's got some serious dementia issues. But I've seen him since then, and he seems to be fine,
Interesting. And interestingly, he was able to work with Newt Gingrich, who was a very powerful Speaker of the House. And that relationship, I mean, probably Tip O'Neill and Reagan had a great relationship, you know, when O'Neill was in
they
the
used to have
Senate.
drinks
Yeah,
afterwards.
they were in the Senate, but I'm not sure Clinton and Newt had drinks together, but they were able to forge from an economic standpoint and Newt changed Clinton's perspective quite a bit economically. So I give Clinton credit for actually recognizing that, hey, we got to go a different direction here.
Right. Well, also one of the things that happened with Clinton is he lost the midterm elections in the House. And Clinton came out and, and said, that he got the message and he moved from the left to the center, and I told my class the next day that's probably what he was going to do, and that's exactly what he did.
Yep.
And so he moved towards the center so he could appeal to Republicans and Democrats, both kind of reach across the aisle on both of them. Clinton was a very shrewd, smart individual and politician.
Oh, he's a shrewd politician, no question about it.
Yeah, so got a lot of respect for him. And
came out of nowhere, out of Arkansas.
Came out of Arkansas, yeah.
All right, let's move past Mr. Clinton. We talked about both Bushes. Now we move to Mr. Obama.
Well, actually, I didn't talk about Senior, I don't think, did I?
No, let's talk about Senior a little bit before we go to Mr. Obama.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, following in the steps of Reagan, same party. And tell the push-up story. Remember the push-up story where...
oh, no, that was the jumping jack story.
Jumping jack story, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, when I finished the book with Bush, I flew back to Houston to give him his copy, we made a special copy for him. And so I'm in his chief of staff's office, and she goes and tells him that I'm there. So, and there's a short distance between her office and Bush's office. So I walk out the door, I'm going down that short hallway, and Bush's office door is open, and I hear this strange noise coming from his office. And so I walk in the door, and here's Bush doing, these like a monkey, swinging his arms up and down. Where's the author? Where's the author? And he's jumping up and down like you see a Jack
LaLanne.
Yeah, Jack LaLanne. Or,
for those of the older, those of my generation.
Yeah. And so anyway, I go, I'm right here, Mr. President, I'm right here. And so, he sat down and we talked and everything like that. But I'm just blown away. He had such a good sense of humor that a lot of people didn't see. And he just had a great time, just kind of jumping up and down like a chimpanzee, and everything, and welcoming me into the office. And no, he was a great man. And we talked about.
Well, you had the big decision with the no new taxes. I mean, and you wrote the book.
Oh, yeah.
Read My Lips, No New Taxes. I mean, that defined his presidency.
Yeah. But
it probably cost him
another
another 4 years.
And he knew that, too, one time that he did it. It was sort of like what it reminded me of when he described everything. It was like somebody who'd been through a divorce and wasn't sure whether they were making the right decision.
Yeah.
And because he thought he made the right decision, but emotionally it was really painful.
Yeah.
So it kind of kept going back and forth, and so forth. And that's kind of, I don't know why, but that analogy always jumped into my head and everything. But one of the interesting things, too, that he told me one time is, two things, actually. Brent Scowcroft confirmed this as well. In the Iraq, there was trying to think of the oil crisis that was. Sorry, I'm having a senior moment here.
It's all right.
Yeah, but anyway,
when they were burning the oil fields, is that what?
When they burned the oil fields, but also Iraq was involved in the oil deals, and Bush was going to go in and take out Iraq and Saddam Hussein and everything like that. And
this is Senior.
This is Senior.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Brent Scowcroft told him, don't do that. You'll be fighting door to door. It'll be a nightmare. And W never paid any attention. And he went and did that. And it was a constant, and it's because Scowcroft went over there for Thanksgiving dinner all the time. And there was constant tension between W and Scowcroft because of the foreign policy. In fact, Scowcroft even wrote an article and one of the publications about foreign policy should be based upon national interest, not morality.
Yeah.
And Bush was basing it on morality and had to go in there and kind of do that kind of thing. And so, anyway, that was interesting. Then Bush also told me that the pain that he went through in sending people into combat, knowing they were going to get killed, or ordering planes to drop bombs on factories. He always looked at one the bombs that dropped at night when all you would get was the janitors and you wouldn't get the workers.
Yeah.
And so he said
Very conscientious.
very
Yeah.
conscious about human life.
Yep.
And it was very painful for him to go to war.
Right.
But it wasn't something that he wanted to do.
Well, he always worried about exit strategies, right? Wasn't
Yeah.
that a big thing for him?
Right, it was.
Yeah. Important.
That was important, yeah. And that
Yeah.
was Nixon's deal too. And Nixon always said you had to have an exit strategy.
Right.
It's part of his foreign policy.
Yep.
And so,
Yep. Oh, you stress that in your classes. Okay. Let's move to Mr. Obama,
okay.
the first African-American president in our history. An amazing phenomena, came out of Chicago,
Right.
and incredible orator, maybe the best speaker we've ever had as a president. And got 8 years in the presidency. And your experience with Mr. Obama.
Well, I met him about 4 or 5 times. I went to his 49th birthday party in Chicago. It's only 50 people there, sat at Mayor Daley's table and so forth. So that was a real honor. But one of the things you talked about, orators, I also got invited down to San Francisco to a breakfast. And then the night before, he was speaking to the general public in an auditorium. And I went down there for that. And I'm sitting there, and he's talking to the crowd, and they're yelling, "We love you, Obama, we love you."
Almost worship.
It was. And I'm sitting there, I'll never forget the thought I had. This guy is a superstar. You know, I mean, he had people eating out of his hands, you know, and stuff like that. And you'll like this, when we were in the photo line, I took one of my fraternity brothers down, because my wife had been to so many of these events, she didn't want to go. So we're in the photo line, and the person standing in front of us was Jerry Rice. So we got a good chance to talk to Jerry Rice, and then Obama went ape when he saw it was Jerry Rice, you know, and stuff like that. But no, so Obama was a fantastic orator and so forth. I did not like him personally. I went to his 49th birthday party, and he got ticked off at me. I always get presidential signatures.
Yeah.
And so part of this is...
Oh, no, the Secret Service knows you well.
Yeah. So anyway, but I don't sell them. You know, and some of it I had...
Unless it's for charity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I give them to charity.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had something for me, and I had something for Carter. So that I donate to the Carter Center. You know, I don't tell them it's for Carter, because the presidents don't like Carter. The other presidents don't, because he's caused them so much grief. In fact, I got a good story to tell you about that one. But anyway, what happened was that it was his 49th birthday party. There was 5 tables with 10 people at a table, and he went around and sat down at each table and all this kind of stuff. And so we got a chance to talk to him. I asked him about his energy policy and all this. And then at the end, they were going to bring out a cake. And so I thought Obama was getting ready to leave, and I didn't know the cake was coming in. So I walked over to the door where he was going to leave. I thought he was going to leave, and they wheeled in this cake. So they wheeled the cake in, and I'm standing on one side of the cart, and President Obama's on the other side. There's 3 candles on the cake. And so everybody sings happy birthday to him, and I'm standing right here. I mean, I'm as close to him as, I mean, the cart's right here, and the cake's right there. And so he leans over to blow out the candles, and he doesn't blow out the candles, he blows on me. And without even thinking, I said, "Come on, give me a break. There's only 3 candles." And I just kind of blurted it out.
Yeah.
And he goes, I close my eyes. You know? And so then anyway, afterwards, he kind of walks away and walks over to the side. And I figured he's going to take off, so I had an item in my pouch that I wanted to get him signed. He'd already signed one thing for me. So I go over and ask him to sign this. And he says, really loud, so everybody in the room can hear it. He's really embarrassed me. "I've already signed something for you," you know, and all this kind of stuff. I go, yes, Mr. President. I put it back in my pouch. He says, give it to me and I'll sign it, you know.
But he had to make that point.
He had to make that point, yeah.
You know, you made a comment earlier about the worship. You know, some presidents, I think Reagan at some level was worshipped by he kind of changed the Republican Party and turned them a little bit. Obviously, Obama changed, and Clinton for a long time too. Clinton was kind of up on a pedestal, right?
Right.
And worshipped to some level. Presidents have that. I mean, I would assume George Washington at some level was worshipped because he was the first. Yeah. And throughout history, there's been very charismatic people that have held the office.
You remind me about a story about Washington. Nobody ever touched George Washington. And after he got elected to the presidency, I think it was James Madison put his arm on his shoulder in an event. And Washington took his hand like this, put it back down to his side, and nobody ever touched Washington again. He did this at a party.
Wow.
And
he just didn't want to be touched?
He didn't want to be touched.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole worship thing, though. I mean, the phenomena with Obama was, I mean, his speeches, the crowds.
The black president.
Oh, yeah.
He was a great orator.
Yeah, and people just went nuts for him.
Yeah.
And basically in fact, many people still worship him. He's the leader de facto of the Democratic Party still to this day. Yeah. He's the man. So let's move to the next one. Mr. Trump. Okay. President Trump there. Great shot with Dan there. That's pretty awesome. And Dawn's in the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great shot. And Trump.
Right.
A whole different animal.
Right.
Media star, multi-billion-dollar real estate developer, kind of built the skyline of New York.
Right.
The MAGA movement, if that's a worship kind of cult or whatever people want to call it.
Yeah.
He's not the only one that's had the worship is my point here. I mean, it's happened before and it'll probably happen again. Some politicians just at certain points rise in the eyes of the public and are worshiped in a certain way by one side or the other.
Well,
correct?
Also, the office of the presidency, I think, is significant because it is such a powerful and unique. You're the most powerful person in the world.
Yeah.
And so people look to that, and it's just symbolic, you know. And this is why, like George Sr. told me one time, you know, I had this conversation before, that the office of the presidency is far more important than the president. And that it's the incumbent upon the President of the United States to do everything to preserve the integrity of that office, the very thing which you're talking about. So people respect the office and the man who's in the office, but most important is the office. And the president represents that office.
Right, and you've made the point in conversations, and I think you made it in the video as well at Cal State University Chico with President Steve Perez. You talk about maybe we've lost a little bit of that since Obama, Trump, Biden. The focus seems to be more on them or on me than on the office itself. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I feel. I feel the last three, you know, I felt Obama was always all about him. And I experienced different things, different events that I went to that gave me that sense. And he was not very gracious to people, you know, and so forth. And then Trump always talks about, this is just my opinion, but he's always talking about how he's the greatest president of this, or his administration is the greatest this and the greatest that, and so forth.
Which turns a lot of people off. That's caused him problems.
Yeah, it has. And so it's the office, and he should be talking about, you know, how proud he is to have been able to do this or do that, you know, but he doesn't have to say, I'm the greatest, or my administration was the greatest, but he's always throwing that out in there. It's the best, it's the greatest.
And I have a comment on that, but we'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
And then talk about Biden in that respect.
Yeah, Biden the same way. I think he's disgraced the office of the presidency. In fact, I had a chance to meet Biden. He would have been my 10th president, and I chose not to do it. And I wouldn't have him sign the baseball, and I got 9 presidents on that baseball.
Yeah. Yep.
So I wouldn't have him sign the baseball because I think, in my opinion, it would be devaluing the baseball because of the Hunter Biden stories and, you know.
Just all the conflicts he's had. Yeah.
All the conflicts he's had, the way he's handled himself as president. and so on.
Well, you don't see him as presidential, so to speak.
I don't. No,
Yeah.
he's not presidential, and that's the problem. He hasn't upheld the dignity of the office of the presidency. And when he was vice president, you and I talked about how, he tried to use his influence to win support for Hunter Biden and his company.
Burisma and
Burisma, yeah.
in Ukraine, yeah.
Ukraine.
So let's go back to Trump for a minute, because you and I have had this conversation a few times. And the Trump bravado, if that's what it is, kind of highlighting me a little bit more than you really need to, number one, probably hurts you with many constituencies, especially women, right? Because you come off as a little bit braggadocious, unlike the Bushes, who just kind of wanted to stay in the background and don't want all that attention and credit. But I liken Trump to kind of Rick Barry. You remember Rick, the championship star, the MVP of the NBA. The '75 Warriors won the team, won the NBA championship. That team that won it in '75 was the biggest underdog in NBA history to win an NBA championship. Right. It went through a lot of turmoil, a lot of changes on the roster for that season. But Rick Barry was the star.
Right.
And one of the players that came to the Warriors recognized that early, that he was a special talent that could make everybody else better. But Rick, much like Trump, his bravado, his New York bravado, where it came from was, as a high school kid learning how to play basketball, and he was very talented, he would take the buses over to Rucker Park, which was in Harlem, which is where the greatest street basketball is ever played and where many NBA players hone their skills. He would go in there and compete, and you had to be tough or you went home right away.
Yeah.
And so he gained that bravado by standing up for himself and playing against elite basketball competition to make himself better. So he took a sense of pride of that. And Rick Barry probably could have been the greatest coach or GM ever in the NBA. But as his teammates found out, he was hard to get along with at times. But he was a tremendous player, a most valuable player in the league, leading scorer. And Trump, much like Trump, coming out of New York as a businessman, having to fight for everything, and is given credit for rebuilding the New York skyline with all the Trump properties and developments. In that environment, you have to be
tough,
crazy tough to be as successful he's been. So that bravado kind of comes to the forefront more than maybe it should. And then in today's world, it gets blown out of proportion with the media coverage. And so it's hard to deflect that, but he's never going to change. That's just not who he is and where he came from.
No, that's a great analogy, John. It really is. And then also you got to take into consideration about his father's influence. His dad was a tough guy, a tough businessman, and demanded a lot, and so he was always under pressure, not to be a loser, but to be a winner. And
he was sent to a boarding school, right?
Military school. He's sent to military school and stuff like that. But, and Trump, and it's like, I've told people this before, I was in the construction business also for...
Very successful, yes.
54 years. I had college rental units and built my own.
Yep.
And I told people, there's people you do business with because you want to, and there's this guy in Chico who's Charlie Crabtree. He's passed away, but we used to do business on a handshake for about 40 years before he died. And then there's people you do business with because you have to. That's a Donald Trump. Trump gets the job done. I had a concrete guy who come in, got the city to come out and do an inspection on my project on the weekend. And he got the job done. I had to do business with him. I didn't like him.
Right.
I didn't trust him. But, I had to double check everything all the time. But he got the job done. And so I wanted to do business with him. That's the way Trump is. He gets the job done as president. He did a good job as president. You don't have to like the guy. You just have to like what he does. You know?
Well, I mean, again, the emotion wrapped up in Trump, the Trump derangement factor is a big deal.
It is.
But again, I had this conversation with some very intelligent people that are really have a hard time with Trump as a leader.
Yeah.
They appreciate some of the policies and what happened, but they have a hard time getting past his bravado, if you will, and his quote unquote past. That's he's dehumanized by the media so often that, and I think that's probably helped Trump to this point because people just tune it out, right? Yeah. But the policies, to wrap this up with all the presidents, the policies that they are able to bring to bear that benefit the country, or in some cases, well-intentioned policies that don't end up benefiting the country. What's the leadership? If there's a common thread of the success you've seen in presidents, what is that common thread that makes them be successful as presidents? Is it just the policies? Is it the combination of their leadership style? Is it the people they put around them? What would you say from the time you spent with these gentlemen?
Well, it's kind of combination of both. I mean, like, one thing that as a leader has to have is you have to have the vision, and so Nixon called it, you have to have the head, the heart, and the guts. You have to have the vision, you have to have compassion, you have to have the guts to carry it out. And so what you find is that you got to, just like I was describing with Reagan. Reagan had that vision.
Yeah.
And then Bush Senior, 41, told me that, as president, he can't know all this stuff. He's got to get good people around him.
Bingo.
To your point right there.
Yeah.
So you rely upon the people that you get around you. And so it's really important to pick good people that you can trust and that are talented.
Yeah.
And so that really affects your administration as well, and then you got to have the guts to carry out the policies. And there's certain things that some of the presidents I don't agree with, and I don't want to get myself in trouble because they might see.
Well, you can't agree with them all. Yeah. No.
But anyway, the point is they have the conviction, the courage of their conviction to carry it out.
Right.
And that's what's really important. Is a lot of people can talk the game, but they can't play the game. And so just like Ford had the conviction, had the vision to pardon Nixon, carried it out, and had the courage to do that in the convention. Bush Senior, read my lips, no new taxes, the same thing, and so that's what you got to be able to do as a leader. You got to have that vision. As I told you, my neighbor across the street, the vision that he had, it's called Turn on a Dime, and I've been helping him write the book. Yeah. And the decisions that he made, just like that, and he had the vision to see, okay, it's time to get out of this part of the business and go into this part of the business. He was down in Haiti. In fact, I got 3 different perspectives on this now. He was down in Haiti? He was down in Haiti when Carter and Colin Powell and Sam Nunn went down there because Aristide was thrown out of power.
Right.
And they were sent down there to try to get him back into power or get a legally represented governor down there. And his company was hired by the CIA to go down there. It was his first job overseas, and he went down there.
For security.
Wow. And dealt with that situation. Carter told me, that Clinton sent troops and planes in the air, and they came in during the negotiations and said, the U.S. was going to invade, and Carter said he thought he was going to get killed. I got this on tape.
Crazy, yeah.
I taped this whole thing at breakfast one time. And then Dick Darman was on the other end of the phone because Carter called up Clinton and said, do you have troops in the air? And Clinton said, yeah. He said, we should have told me, blah, blah, blah. And then Carter got upset because that night when he flew back to Washington, D.C., there was nobody there of consequence to meet him. And then he spent the night in the Lincoln bedroom. And then he gets up the next morning and he calls CNN and blasts Clinton. It was on the front page of the paper.
Yeah, I remember.
And Clinton never asked him for any more help after that, and Carter never understood that. And that's why a lot of the presidents didn't like Carter because he made their job more difficult.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, the one story I want to tell, if I can squeeze this in, is I donated stuff to Carter. So I donated this baseball. It was signed by 6 presidents, and it sold for $80,000. So then Carter comes up to me and says, well, I got a baseball I'd like to get George W. to sign. Do you think you could do it? I says, I don't know. I'll try. They keep track of who they sign things for and everything. So I call up Freddie, who's George W.'s personal handler, and I said, Freddie, this isn't for me. It's for President Carter, and he'll probably sell it for the Carter Center and make some money for a good cause. And so I said, I'll make it real easy. They'll just FedEx the baseball to you with a box. All you got to do is sign it, drop it back in a prepaid FedEx box, and it's gone. Freddie says, I don't know. Carter gave us so much trouble when we were in the White House. He says, give me a couple of weeks. So a couple of weeks go by, and I get a call from the Carter Center. Dan, how's our baseball? I said, I don't know. I'll call up Freddie. So I call up Freddie, and Freddie says, it's only a baseball. I guess just send it down. So I call up the Carter Center. They send the baseball down. So a couple of days later, I get a phone call from Freddie. Dan, we just can't sign that baseball. Carter gave us such a bad time when we were president that we just can't sign it. It's not on you. We're going to send it back with a letter, and we'll just send the baseball back.
So the relationships between former presidents are good and bad, and good and bad, and you just, timing's everything. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know.
It's mostly Carter. They just don't. Like I was on the W's foundation board for 5 years. Don and we both were. And so we were in a meeting one time, and Obama was president, and somebody raised their hand and says, why don't you have Obama, write an op-ed, build a fire under, why don't you write an op-ed and build a fire under Obama, and get this problem with Congress solved. And W says, first of all, it's not Obama, it's President Obama. And second of all, this was done to me, meaning Carter.
Yeah.
He didn't mention his name, but I know who he's talking about, meaning Carter, and it made my administration, more difficult for my administration to get things done. And so, they just...
No meddle.
Yeah.
W didn't want any meddling.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be part of it.
He didn't. He said, I will never comment on what another president does because it was done to me and it made my job so much more difficult. And so that's the way that's what it is. And that's Carter's problem. He's honest, but it's his way or the highway.
Right.
And if you don't agree with
No,
him,
I learned that when we were drinking wine.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Hey, Dan, great having you.
Okay.
Dan Ostrander, Presidential Historian's Journey, face-to-face, Nixon through Biden. Covered a lot. Congratulations on all the time you got to spend with all these presidents, and more importantly, for sharing with our audience today. With the presidential election right around the corner, pretty dynamic time. As you said, one of the most consequential elections that this country's ever seen.
Well, the most interesting. I mean, you're never going to see another election. I hope not. Anyway,
Yeah, no, we don't need any more stress.
like this. This is just an amazing election cycle.
It is. The next election cycle for president will probably be even more interesting. So we'll have you back in 4 years to talk about that. All right.
All right.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate
Thank
it
you,
as
John.
always.
Okay.
Folks, hope you enjoyed that, and good luck with your votes for the upcoming presidential election. It's just around the corner. Thanks for joining us today.